All right, Exodus chapter number 2 this morning. Exodus just simply means to leave. They're going to get out of there. In Genesis, we found that they're going to stay there 430 years. Jacob took all of his children, all of his in-laws, outlaws, and everybody else took them on down to Egypt with him. And now when you get to the book of Exodus, chapter number 1, they have been there for a total of 350 years. They've been a blessing to that country, blessing to that nation. God's blessed Egypt because of Israel. And what's Egypt do? They get jealous of them, and now they're starting to cause things. Listen, they've been blessed. I find no place in Exodus where they have given the Egyptians any problem at all. But they look at them, boy, they are growing as a nation. They are growing financially in every way. God's just been blessing them. But I found an issue in chapter 1. Don't want to go back there and spend a lot of time. But that Pharaoh said there was a twofold thing he worried about. One, that they would join an enemy that attacked Egypt. The second thing, though, he said, and that they might try to leave and go home. I find in that statement that there has been a longing for these people to go home. I'm a European American. I do not long to go back to Europe. My people have been in this land probably close to 200 years. Barbara's maybe a little bit longer than that. Her first relative came over here. It was one of the Scottish Highlanders. And he was in that rebellion. And when the rebellion was put down, then they gave these Scottish Highlanders an ultimatum. They could either go to the United States or go to the America at that time, or they could be hung. They thought going to America was worse than hanging. So I guess a lot of them got hung, but hers came over here. Now, what I'm saying is this: I have no longing to go back there. You need to understand, Jewish people are not like us. God gave them a land. God gave them a promise over there. That's their land, and they know that's their land. Even those here in the States know what's going on over in Palestine. So we found a longing to go back. Now, what he did, he brought great bondage. This Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, they brought great bondage upon the people. They put them into hard labor, and the more they did that, the more they multiplied. So nothing is tending to work for them. So they said, well, we're going to have the midwives to kill all the baby boys when they're born. Well, they refused to do that. God blessed them, gave them houses, and they continued to multiply. So then he ordered an edict, or ordered from the throne, that all of the male children 2 years old and under would be cast into the river. He wanted these baby boys destroyed. The women, they would take these women, they'd be in servitude, but they were afraid of these men. They wanted them destroyed. So we got down to where a man, in verse number 1, chapter 2, a man of the house of the Levi, he took a wife and a daughter of Levi. So here you find Amram and Jochebed. Pardon me, clearing my throat. But they married, but they were Levites. Now, God's establishing two things. One, the Israeli deliverer is going to be a Levite. But also, he's going to establish what's called the Levitical priesthood. Aaron was the first high priest. Moses had two older brothers and sisters. He had Miriam, and then he had Aaron, and these two were older than Moses. But verse number 2, she conceived again. She bare a son. Interesting, says nothing about the first two. We have no mention here of Miriam and Aaron. But the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, a fine, bouncing baby boy, something to really be proud of, she took that child and she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, in verse number 3, she took for him an ark of bulrushes These bulrushes were something that would float without absorbing the water. They made a good ark for them to be in. They grew in the water itself and made an ark out of that thing. What's an ark? You go back to the book of Genesis, it's a container. It's not a ship that sails someplace. That's why I said I don't go to the ark in Kentucky, and I'm glad a lot of people like to do that. It is not built to the design of the Bible. The ark in the Bible was a rectangular square box. Now, when you take the slope of a ship, all the way top, the bow, everything, and take that slope on the sides, you cut down on what it's able to hold. You think that container in Kentucky is big. The one that God built was like this, and had probably twice as much inside space as the one that they've got there. It was just simply a container to float. That's all. God didn't intend for Moses or Noah and them. I've got Moses on the ark. God didn't intend for Noah and them to get paddles out or oars or put up a sail and sail any place. He just said, you're going to float to where I put you, and then I'm going to let you out there. Same thing here. They built this thing with bulrushes, daubed it with slime and pitch. That's the same thing they did with the ark. They pitched it within and without, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. When I think of the flags, I think of the cattails that we used to have in ponds, things in Kentucky. These are just things that grew up, and they just flagged back and forth in the water. So she didn't put the baby out in the current. Find that interesting. He would have floated all the way out to the Mediterranean. She put the baby in there so the baby would be found. So what she had to do was stop that baby from getting in that current out in the middle. The Nile River is a pretty good-sized river and pretty swift. Comes out of Central Africa, comes all the way up to the Delta area, up in what they call Giza, right up at the Mediterranean Sea, goes out into different branches and goes out into the sea. She never intended for this thing to go anywhere. They put that where these flags would hold that thing in its position and not get caught in the current. If you notice, most of the current, if you got a lot of stuff growing out into the water, the swift part of that current's in the middle, not the sides. So what happened was she put it there to be found. Verse 4, and his sister, now we've got to mention Miriam. Why did she watch over it? I believe she was the oldest child. I know that Aaron was 3 years older than Moses. When Moses was 80, the Bible said that Aaron was 83. Miriam was probably 2 or 3 years older than him. So you got a pretty good-sized little girl out there now, and she's watching this thing to see what transpires. She stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. Now, I want to pick up verse number 5. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. I want you to notice what we call the providence of God. God wanted him found. They wanted him found. But God didn't want him found by just anybody in Egypt. God has a design that is going to come back to help him as he delivers this nation out of Egypt. God wanted him down there for a purpose and wanted him into the very house of Pharaoh himself. Why? No doubt in my mind, the most protected house in the world was the house of Pharaoh. But a lot of benefits went along with this. We'll deal with them in a few minutes. But the daughter of Pharaoh, the providence of God, went down. She went down to bathe at the river. Her handmaidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, her maidens didn't see it, but she saw this. God not only had her come to the river, he had her come to the exact place. You can put a lot of supposition in here that I'm going to say this young woman came down often to bathe at the Nile River. I don't think this was something out of character for her. So what normally happens is you go to the same place. Probably a good place where there was easy access down to the water there. The flags made a good shower curtain around her as she bathed down there. You don't find a lot of open nudity found in the Bible in the Old Testament. Men and women just didn't do that, all right? So she went down, she was hid, she had a good safe place there, and Miriam placed it right there. And when she saw, the daughter of Pharaoh saw that ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Verse 6, and when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. Now, you want to play on a young woman's feelings. You let a small child start crying. Boy, that it does something on the inside of that woman. Women are built not only psychologically different, but naturally they're built different as far as their physiology, the way that a woman's put together. When a woman nurses, that nursing is part of the hormones that are released, but it's also a part of the physiology of that woman. A child will cause them to do that. Now, she's not going to nurse, but I want to say it stirred up something in her very quickly. She knew it was a Hebrew child. Notice what she said. She had compassion on him, said, this one of the Hebrews' children. She knew this child was under the sentence of death. So not only has Amram and Jochebed gone against what the Pharaoh has said, now in his own house we find a rebellion against that, because she should have said, throw the child in the river. Is that not what he commanded? Take the baby out of the ark, throw it in the river. She didn't do that. She went against her father. Verse number 7, and then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter. This interesting, this little girl, Miriam, was there. She had watched afar off when they pulled that babe out and opened that ark, and the babe wept. Evidently she had come up a whole lot closer because she heard what Pharaoh's daughter said. Now, so this is Miriam speaking. Then said his sister, that's Miriam, to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? She knew immediately that this daughter was going to keep that baby. So she's old enough. I want you to see how smart this little girl is. She's old enough that she went up and said, hey, I'll go to the Hebrew. It's a Hebrew child. I'll get a Hebrew lady to come and be nursemaid or nurse to your baby for you. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go, and the maid went and called the child's mother. Now, I want to look at, just for a minute, at Jochebed. God is getting ready to bless the faithfulness of this woman. Now, this is a two-way thing. Amram and Jochebed made this decision, no doubt made it together. They have given this child up for adoption, so to speak. That's what they've done. They're hoping that somebody finds this baby, takes care of this baby. They didn't put it in the river to float away. They put it there to be found. They put it in a specific place because I believe they knew where Pharaoh's daughter came down. So what they did, they put it there. Now she said, you go and you get a maid, and the little girl went and called the child's mother. Look at verse 9. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I'll give thee wages. I'm going to pay you to nurse your own child. How? Sometime in the darkest hours of our life, we see the blessings of God in there. If you'll stop sometimes and get your eyes off of the darkness and look for the light, I found that in bad times, in hard times, that you can see the goodness of God. There's always something to smile about. There's always something to laugh about. There's always something that gives some hope in there. Here's a mother. She gives up that child. She's not going to take the child's life. Now the child is going to be brought back to her to nurse her own child. So she's going to keep that child at least until the age that it's weaned. We find that with Samuel, as Hannah nursed Samuel, and when he was weaned, then she made a little coat. She brought that little fella back to Eli at that point in time and said that I'm going to lend him to the Lord. All right, the Lord lent him to me, I'm going to give him back. Now, what's happening is God's rewarded a woman. I've thought about this often. I don't know how many women in Israel, within Egypt, actually drowned their little boys. I wonder how many. Sometimes you wonder how many people will acquiesce to the demands of government. Now, I am all for following the government, all right? We're to obey every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake until the day that that ordinance goes against what they're scripturally doing. We're having church this morning. Got a lot of people sick. That's fine. We're going to social distance. I have no liberty to shut a church down, and I cannot take 2 weeks out of this pulpit. I believe I need to do what I'm doing right here, teaching and preaching. So we're going to social distance a little bit, and that's fine, and that's good with it. But listen, there comes a time when God's people have to obey God rather than man. That's what she's doing, to kill her own child. But I thought, nope, I don't read where anybody else did what she did. Now, we're talking about a lot of people now. A lot of Jews now, or Israelites, are living in Egypt. They have multiplied exceeding for 350 years. I wonder how many babies died. Now let's look and see what happened. The woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She kept that child long enough to nurse that child. I wonder how many times she sung to that child, talked to that child, loved that child. But when he was nursed, she brought him back. She knew what she had to do. And he became her son, and she called his name Moses. That means drawn, because I drew him out of the water. Now we find the establishment of the deliverer. His life has been saved. His mother got to nurse him. She got wages for doing that. And I'm going to tell you something else, and I don't believe this is a lot of supposition. Moses had a very close relationship with his mother for the rest of his life. We're going to find that because we're going to go somewhere else in just a moment. But she said, I drew him out of the water. Now, I want you to look at the first part of verse 11. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. Bam. 40 years is now gone. Now Israel's been there 390 years. Still enslaved, still in hard bondage. 40 years has now passed. Jochebed nursed her son. When he was weaned, she brought him back. He became the son of Pharaoh's daughter. She named him Moses because she drew him out of the water. But now in a snap of your fingers, we find 40 years has passed. Now, what I want to do this morning, I want you to turn over to the book of Hebrews. The reason we're going to do this, I believe this is a very important statement. When Moses was grown, 40 years passed, he's raised. The book of Hebrews, we're going to go naturally to chapter number 11, around verse 23, 4. Let me find the verse for you this morning. Verse number 23. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. Now what I'm going to do is deal with these intermediate years. We find in one verse 40 years has passed, but these 40 years are not silent years. A lot of people say they were the silent years of Moses' life. No, they're not. They're found in the book of Hebrews. Now, if you look in verse number 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hid of his parents. That's their faith. But that faith was passed on to a young man. I said he had a close relationship with his people and with his mom the rest of his growing up days, all right? He was back and forth. As the son of Pharaoh's daughter, when he got a little bit older, he had free access to go anywhere within the land. But notice what he said, because they saw he was a proper child, they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Verse 24, now, by faith Moses, when he was come to year. Now, we go from the faith of the parents in 23 to the faith of Moses in verse number 24. Now, there's nothing said, but he did not get that faith from Pharaoh's daughter. You need to understand that. He got that faith from his people. I believe he got that faith from his mom and his dad specifically. If he had contact with these people, you know good and well, he spent a lot of time around his mom and dad. He knew who they were, and he spent a lot of time with them. So I'm filling in some blanks. I'm not building doctrine, but I want you to understand that he didn't become a child of God by faith, because of Pharaoh's daughter. I find no place where she ever converted. So we find in that 40 years that he had a working relationship. Had a man one time tell me that the reason he wanted Aaron to speak for him was because Moses didn't know the Jewish language. I just shook my head. I thought to myself, he spoke to them when he's 40 years old. He was raised around them. He had their faith. That faith came through the Jewish language. Listen, he was bilingual. He understood. If you go down to what they call the valley, down in Texas, go down to Edinburgh, Donna, Texas, got all kinds of little town, Mission, Texas, right together. These people speak Spanglish. They're fluent in Spanish. They're fluent in English. They talk back and forth. They've got Hispanics and English speaking in the same high schools and grade schools and kindergartens. There's a mixture of the two languages down there. And these people, listen, you can speak in English or you can roll right over into Spanish. It doesn't matter which way you go, they can speak the language. So we find a young man that he was come to years. Something happened. By faith, something happened to this young man. In those 40 years, he came to know Jehovah God, just like his mother and his dad knew Jehovah God. Now, notice what he did at the end of that 40 years. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I find that real interesting. You say, why? Because, one, he was not mistreated by Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Is that not right? Man, you're talking about a silver spoon in a boy's mouth. I find no place where she was anything other than a good mama to him. Now, she didn't know Jehovah God. She didn't know him, but at the same time, this man was raised with everything, the education, the protection, all of the knowledge and wisdom of these people. You need to understand how wise these Egyptians were. They built the pyramids. I've got news for these people. Aliens didn't come down, build pyramids, and go back to outer space. I get so burnt out with this science falsely so-called that people would come from another galaxy to here, fly around in the air and make no effort to communicate with us. Why in the world they come here to start with? I mean, that's all this Star Trek junk and everything they've got going on out here. These people had wisdom. They built those things to where they lined up perfectly with the solar system. They understood our solar system. The Bible said that God gave the sun, moon, and stars for signs and for seasons. You go through the Old Testament, you find a lot of these constellations, like the Seven Sisters and the Big Bear and all of these. Listen, they knew these same constellations we did. They knew where the North Star was. They knew how to follow that North Star without even knowing anything about magnetism as we know it today. These were the wisest people in the world, were the Egyptians. Then they built these things. We still have it, and I'm talking about 2500 BC they were building these things. When history that's been rewritten tells you they were cavemen walking around knocking a woman in the head and dragging her off by the hair. I've got news for you. They had one of the greatest civilizations in the world established at that time. They were at the pinnacle. They have never gone back to where they were 2500 BC. What the greatest nation on the face of the earth, the most wise people on the face of the earth. That's where he was grown up. But in these 40 years, something caused him to transition from Egypt back to the Jews. Now, master to slave, riches to poverty. You understand where he's going. It takes some faith for someone to choose the hard road. This young man had a strong faith, very strong faith. He chose the hard way over the light way, the bad way over what we would call the good way. Something that was instilled in him. I think he was interacting heavily for 40 years with the Jewish people, and especially his mom and dad were people of great faith, built an ark of bulrushes and put him out there instead of obeying the commandment of the king. So we're going to go back to it. I find no problem with Pharaoh's daughter in verse number 24, but he knew something. He did not belong. Now, was it that he did not belong physically? I think he belonged physically. Pharaoh's household was his home. He's lived there 40 years, folks. He's accepted as one of the greatest men, no doubt. And we're not going to go back to the Ten Commandments where he was, I don't find in here where he was heir to the throne just simply because of who he was. But I do find a man of great privilege, a man of great pleasure. He could have had anything, anytime, anywhere he wanted. And he made a choice not to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So we look, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, here was his choice. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. He knew what it would cost him. There's one thing for him for 40 years to visit back and forth and learn about the God of Israel and learn their customs and all this. But he understood something. These were masters, these were slaves, these were hard masters, and that slavery was tough. These people were in hard bondage. Matter of fact, God said up on Mount Sinai when Moses came, I have heard their voices of their affliction by the reason of their taskmasters. I'm talking about they were pouring it on them. But Moses said, now, if I come out publicly, he could have been one of these in the closet Christians. You find them in the Bible. Nicodemus was one. Joseph of Arimathea was one. They didn't so-called come out of the closet until Christ was crucified. Then Joseph of Arimathea, and you find in one of the Gospels, and Nicodemus. You remember him in John chapter 3? He came to the Lord by night and said, Master, hey, we understand that thou art a teacher come from God. No man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. He wanted to know who this man Jesus was, and Jesus answered him twice and said, Marvel not that I said unto thee, ye must be born again. And I believe he led him to himself that night when he gave him John 3:16, 17, and 18. I believe there was a conversion in his heart. Matter of fact, he stood against the other Pharisees at one time, and they said, are you one of his believers also, or you are a follower of him also? So you've got what we call in the closet Christians. It's not that they're not saved, but they're not willing to bear the shame and the reproach of being called a child of God. I believe we've got a silent bunch of people in America that are that way today. Hey, we need to be a Christian in Walmart. We need to be a Christian in Ingles. We need to be a Christian here. We need to be a Christian everywhere we go because we're salt and we're light. If the salt has lost its flavor or if the light is hid under a bushel, then neither one of them are actually any good to the world. What I'm finding here was he chose to suffer. Notice the word affliction. That means they're pouring it on them, friend. He said, they're going to have to beat me along with my people. I'm going to choose the right side. Now, notice what he said, than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He set and established something. This is going to be my last verse because I've got, I chose the wrong. I want to mark this real quick while we're here because I want to bear down on it just a little bit. What was Egypt? Egypt was pleasure of sin. Now, I find that pleasure of sin in two areas. One, no doubt a physical. Let me tell you, Pharaoh's house, they could have any woman, any man, anybody, any place. Let me tell you, you're talking about power. They had the riches of the world in their hand, and they had the power and the authority of a dictatorship over all of the land. This man up there called Pharaoh, most powerful man in the world. This is his family. And friend, you don't withhold anything from that family. He could have had anything he wanted anytime he wanted it, and that's just the way it was back in that day. And he talked about pleasure of sin. Hey, there is pleasure. If sin wasn't fun, nobody'd be doing it. Now you just think about that. I'm not advocating sin. I'm just telling you that it applies to our fleshly nature. It does that. It's very, very powerful in its existence. That's why Paul said, the things that I would do, I don't do. The things I shouldn't do, that's what I do. Boy, he went on down in Romans chapter number 7. Boy, he made a listing of things. He said, I've found a law that when I would do good, evil. What is that? That's our physical presence. Evil. That thing's with me, all right? It's always there. He said, from my mind, I serve God. With my flesh, my body, I serve the flesh. He said, I've got two natures in there. So what happened was, we find a young man with no influence in Egypt to do right. So 40 years, he's had no influence to do right there. But he's, for 40 years, had influence to do right here. I'm talking about a relationship. I want to say again, he had a bonding relationship with his mom, dad, his brother, his sister, and the people there, and he loved them, and he learned righteousness not from Egypt. There was pleasure in sin. But he understood another precept. It was seasonal. You know, the Bible said over in the book of Ecclesiastes, a time for every purpose, for every season. Hey, we've got seasons. Seasons come, seasons go. We're getting ready here. We're in the fall of the year now. Leaves are falling, won't be long. Seasonal change will be in the wintertime, springtime, summertime, as long as time endures. He said you'll have summer and winter and seed time and harvest. You'll have 4 seasons, and we've got those seasons change. He understood a principle. You may enjoy the pleasures of sin, but it will only be seasonable. Seasons always change. So he learned a precept from the Hebrew people. One, he had their faith. But then he also learned the moral aspect of what I call biblical Christianity in here. He said, I'll take the affliction over the pleasure. Because one of them is seasonal and the other one is not. Now, does that mean they're always going to have affliction? No. But it means in this flesh you're always going to have an affliction as a child of God. You're going to have problems. Living for God is not easy. Did you hear what I said? It's not easy, folks. I'm talking about consistent Christianity, just living for God, getting up every day and looking in that mirror and crucifying that flesh once again and telling that body, I'm going to beat my body under subjection. He didn't do that with his fist. Paul did that with the spiritual aspect of him that said to that physical aspect, you're going to stay in line today one way or the other, all right? We find that battle took place, and he made a choice in his life that would have cost him his life had it not been for God. You say, what do you mean? I believe with all my heart that Pharaoh would have killed him. I believe he knew that. We're going to find in this next week, he's going to flee. We're going to come back to this. He's going to have to leave everything he has ever known and loved for fear of his life, friend. Pharaoh would have killed him. He would have been put to death, not just afflicted, friend. He would have been put to death, and he had to go to the backside of the Arabian desert and live for 40 years before he can come back. Amen. We're going to stop right there, and we'll pick up next week.